Hey guys, it's Amy with Root and Response. Thank you for joining me for part 3 of my story, talking about my personal experience recovering from neural circuit symptoms, debilitating anxiety, and nervous system dysregulation. In part 3, we unsurprisingly left off with me hitting rock bottom. It was around the time of this downward mental and physical spiral that I found a functional neurologist here in the Phoenix area. Looking back, I do feel really fortunate to find him when I did. At that time, I didn't feel super fortunate, I'll be real with you. In fact, for the first couple of months after working with him, I was pretty resistant to almost everything he was saying to me, and I kept pushing the obsessive medical testing and Googling. He actually owns a practice called Desert Brain and Spine. His name is Dr. Russell Teams, and from the very beginning and the very first meeting with him, he actually believed wholeheartedly that what I was experiencing was rooted in a highly dysregulated autonomic nervous system. In fact, he explained the autonomic nervous system to me in depth. He talked about hypervigilance. He talked about trauma a lot, certain personality types. He talked about coping mechanisms rooted in control and fear. And I will be real with you, he knows this. I've actually been on his podcast, which is the Neuro Reset podcast. I think my episode might be 46. I'm not sure. I have blonde hair in it, you guys. I've changed my hair color since then. But anyway, I thought it was complete bullshit. I'll be real with you. And I had symptoms that felt incredibly physical, right? I was throwing up. I had lost a significant amount of weight in a very quick time period, like 42 pounds in like 2 months. And I was lean to start with. I lost vision in my left eye. I was having heart palpitations. I was barely sleeping for months on end. I wasn't imagining any of those things. So when people talked about behavioral responses and nervous system regulation and stress and anxiety, I just incorrectly assumed that most of them were implying the symptoms weren't real. I assumed they were saying it was all in my head, and that felt super invalidating. The irony is that most of them weren't actually saying that. Even the piles of specialists I'd seen, they just lacked the framework and experience and honestly even education to properly and helpfully convey how a poor stress response and behavior specifically translates to physical symptoms and even extreme physical symptoms. I just didn't understand what they meant yet. So even though I wasn't fully buying into what my functional neurologist was saying, because panic and doubt still had a major hold on me, I kept going to appointments. I kept trying to hear him out, partly because my family really believed that he was kind of onto something, my husband in particular and my daughter, but partly because I had already just paid for the services, and also partly because I was running out of options. But I couldn't help but notice that he seemed so confident in what was happening to me, and unlike other specialists, he was actually able to tell me what my symptoms were, like even before I shared all of them with him, like even some of the bizarre ones, you guys, like internal vibrations and things like that. At some point during that same period of time that I was seeing him, I also stumbled across mind-body recovery content online. This was a slow process for me. Some people, this clicks in one fell swoop. I was not that person. I always say to people, I was my own hardest client, okay? So I found people like the Steady Coach, aka Dr. Yo, the Anxiety Guy, the works of John Sarno, Dan Buglio, Dan Ratner, Daniel at the Sleep Coach School channel. I always call them the Dans. I started hearing stories that sounded really eerily similar to mine, just on repeat. People who had absolutely debilitating, terrifying physical symptoms, people who had been medically cleared, people who had spent months or years searching obsessively for answers, people who eventually recovered by changing their relationship with fear and stressors and emotional processing and the symptoms themselves. But even still, I was not fully convinced. Like, I listened and I watched and I researched, but there was still a big part of me that believed there had to be something else going on that everyone was missing, like some super mysterious thing that just hadn't been found yet. And I was still desperately searching for, like the diagnosis that would finally explain everything. I recall at one point pleading with a neurologist, mortified, to find a way to test me for fatal familial insomnia. Like, you guys. And I understand, like looking back now, I can laugh a little bit with some dark humor, but in the moment, those thoughts and behaviors were fueled by pure panic and misery. And so I can laugh at it, but I also understand it. Finally, you guys, I just hit a point where I couldn't keep going the way that I had been. Looking back, I realized that I like actually needed to reach that point, as sad as it was. I just don't think I would have been open to anything new before I hit that point. But at the time, it was the lowest point of my life. And I've been through some very difficult things in my life, you guys, but this was different. This was like utter and complete hopelessness. So before I move on, I do want to give a little trigger warning for discussions of suicidal ideations and thoughts. If that's something you don't want to hear, feel free to skip ahead. I totally get it, but I think it's important to talk about because I have never worked with someone ever experiencing neural circuit symptoms that hasn't had similar thoughts. So I do want to address this part of my story. So here we go. One day after, at this point, just months of misery and suffering, I was sitting on my bed, just feeling completely defeated. But like this time it felt different because I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly emotional. Like looking back, I just felt so empty and apathetic and just like done on every level, just done. And I picked up my phone, and normally I would have been researching symptoms and then lying to my family about researching symptoms, lying to my doctor about it. No, I'm not doing that, but I was researching diagnosis, looking for answers, trying to solve the next problem. But again, this time was just different. And I started searching for end of life services. And I want to be really, really clear about something. I love my husband. I love my children. They are my entire world. Okay. As a wife, as a mother, I would have endured almost anything to stay here with them. So the fact that I had even reached a point where I was entertaining thoughts about not being here anymore, I think tells you how desperate and hopeless I felt. And I know a lot of people can relate to that go through this. And I'm sorry. I am truly so sorry. I wasn't looking for end of life services because I didn't want to be here anymore. I was looking because I wanted the pain and suffering to stop. I seriously believed at that point that I had exhausted every possible option. So at this point, mind you, I'd been awake for somewhere between like 4 and 6 days straight. No joke. Not mostly awake, awake. I was physically exhausted. I was emotionally exhausted, mentally exhausted. And I just simply could not imagine living the rest of my life the way that I was in that exact moment. But in that moment, and I will literally never forget it. I usually get emotional talking about it, but I think I've talked about it enough now that I can get through it without crying. Something kind of interesting happened. I sat there searching for the subject that I was searching, which was pretty low, right? And then I noticed a burning sensation in my feet, like intense burning nerve pain. It was like the kind of sensation that just grabbed my attention, right? The symptoms just, that's what they do. And without even thinking about it, almost like muscle memory, I abandoned the search for end of life services. And I just immediately shifted gears, started looking up small fiber neuropathy. And somewhere in the middle of that search, I had this realization. And it's one that sounds incredibly simple now, but it completely changed everything for me in that millisecond. I remember thinking to myself, if I truly didn't want to be here anymore, I wouldn't care about my symptoms. I would have just ignored the burning. I wouldn't have been researching it. I wouldn't have been trying to figure it out. The fact that I was still doing those things meant there was just a tiny little part of me that still wanted to be here. And there was a tiny part of me that believed maybe there would be another answer. And there was still a part of me fighting. And I remember I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. And I felt like so empty. And like I said, I didn't even have enough energy left to cry. But I realized if I was going to entertain the thoughts, as irreversible as the thoughts that I had just been entertaining, I needed to be absolutely certain that I had exhausted every possible option. And the truth was, I knew deep down that I hadn't, like not really or fully. There was this entire category of information that I had mostly dismissed, or at best employed with kind of half-assed consistency, or I should say half-assed inconsistency, and then just like written it off. Like it didn't work in a week. My sleep didn't get better in a week. I'm done with it, right? I never really addressed the controlling, the solving, the obsessive fixing, hypervigilance, or really tried to hear what my functional doc was saying. So I made a decision. I was like, okay, I'm going to stop feeding the fear because everything else I tried hadn't helped. And honestly, just because I quite literally had nothing left to lose, I was out of money, I was out of options, okay? To this day, I don't know exactly where that flicker of determination came from in that insane sleep-deprived state that I was in, but I am so incredibly grateful that it showed up when it did. I'm so grateful. Like, I am so proud of myself in that moment looking back. And I picked up my phone and I cleared the search again. And instead of searching symptoms, diagnosis, diseases, worst case scenarios, I just literally typed in the words health, anxiety. And that's when I found Dr. Claire Weeks. And more specifically, I found her book, Hope and Help for Your Nerves. I read her recounting story after story of people recovering from what she referred to as nervous illness or nervous system sensitization. Her groundbreaking book, and she was really a pioneer in this field, you guys. It was written and published in 1961, but she was and still is truly, like I said, a pioneer in treating diagnoses that are rooted in nervous system dysregulation. And this includes many of the diagnoses that I ultimately received going through all of these different doctors and specialists, things like POTS, dysautonomia, vestibular migraine, long COVID, CFS, MCAS, and more. These were all diagnoses I had, plus some. It wasn't a dramatic overnight transformation, okay? I didn't just like find these content creators, find these educators, find these doctors, find this book, and just like I got better overnight. But there was a shift that did happen. But this process is about a process of having to return over and over again to those breakthroughs. It's not like you have an epiphany and you stay there, right? I always tell people this is not like Buddhism. You don't just like reach enlightenment and stay there. You have enlightenment, you have epiphanies, you have these pivotal moments, but you have to go back over and over. So it wasn't anything close to a dramatic overnight recovery. It was incredibly messy. Okay. I had setbacks. I had symptom flares, speed bumps, moments where I panicked that I was completely relapsing or worse than where I started, days and even weeks where I questioned and doubted everything. Okay, I will be real with you guys. That is one thing I was committed to when I started my social media platform and educating in this space. I will be fully transparent about what this process looked like for me. There were periods where I was convinced I wasn't even making progress. Looking back, I know that first decision was so pivotal. It was the moment that I finally stopped trying to solve my way out of symptoms and started learning how to change my relationship with them and subsequently with life as a whole. And I became willing to try something different. And I opened myself up to the scariest thing I could imagine, which was surrendering to uncertainty, accepting discomfort, and unlearning a life of fear adjacent coping mechanisms that was keeping my body stuck in fight or flight. And that willingness was the thing that ultimately changed my life. That's where I'm going to leave this story for now. As my content library on this channel grows, I'll be sharing my own framework that helped me recover from neural circuit symptoms and what I've learned as both someone with lived experience and someone who has coached at this point hundreds of people going through the same thing. I am super committed, like I said, to sharing with full transparency what this process looked like for me, the mistakes I made, the things that I learned, the things that helped, the things that didn't, supportive versus unsupportive, and how I eventually went from being completely debilitated by neural circuit symptoms to feeling like a normal person again and helping people navigate the same journey. Before I go, I do want to leave you with one final thought. The reason that I created Root and Response is actually pretty simple. I wanted people to see a really authentic picture of recovery, not just the marketable high points, okay? Not just a promise that you'll be better in 30 days if you follow the right formula or, spend thousands of dollars. And I want to make this information accessible. That is very, very important to me for reasons that I'll talk about as this channel grows. Because while coaching can be helpful, communities can be helpful, Programs can be helpful. Recovery itself, honestly, doesn't really require any of those things. You can recover for free, and I want people to know that. Most of what helped me get better was available for free, and I never want someone to feel hopeless because of a difference in access to financial resources. If you can't afford support, if you're struggling with neural circuit symptoms right now, I want you to know that you're not alone and there is a path forward. And even if you can't see it yet, I promise you things really can change. And I am a living example of that. If you're looking for a place to start, I have linked my free ebook below. You don't need to give me your email address or sign up for a newsletter, anything like that. You don't need to buy anything. It is a freebie, just a resource that explains why neural circuit symptoms develop and some of the foundational concepts that help me begin my own recovery journey. I just see it as kind of an educational springboard. So thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video.